It feels like every celebrity these days is like super jacked. And I'm not talking just like good shape. I'm talking veiny bros. I mean, veins I didn't even know existed. Even the comedians are huge. Like, why is Jim from The Office looking like he's training for the Olympics? And this got me thinking, like, when did we get so obsessed with muscles? Because I don't remember most celebrities being super jacked, right? Different types of bodies have been in and out of style for as long as people have been around. Remember the early 2000s? It was all about being like rail thin, right? A stick, starving yourself, not eating, having a glass of wine for dinner, and like that was it. And now people, you know, it's kind of gone the opposite direction, where people pay a lot of money to be a little bit more, you know, curvy, juicy, all that good stuff. But now it kind of feels like it's circling back to being thin again. It's a mess, isn't it? But it changes all the time. The quote-unquote ideal male body has shifted a lot over time too. So the first obsession with muscles started way back in ancient Greece. I mean, they invented the Olympics in 776 BC. So, you know, they were kind of obsessed with working out and like lifting and being strong. But they did go out of fashion for a really long time. But as society advances and upper class gets more access to education, being smart becomes more important than being strong. It was all about working out that muscle, you know? Muscles were seen as brutish and kind of tacky. That is, up until the 1800s. In Europe and America, women, you know, they're completely like corseted up and buttoned up to the chin. Men are all like wearing top hats and vests, layers, lots of layers, fluffy pirate shirts. Sports like playing polo or riding horses were definitely fashionable, but like no one was trying to get super muscular. It meant you had the body of someone who was like a laborer. You worked a lot. But when something goes out of style, usually like circles back around, right? And when it came to like muscles, this came back around as kind of like a counterculture or underground movement. And that's exactly what the strong men were. And people saw them as, not my words, freaks. Usually if you were like big and muscular, you were part of a circus or a traveling show. A freak show is what they would call it. And you were seen as like just entertainment. Like, let's go look at how big this guy is. Whoa, that's crazy. He's so big. Like, you never see that anywhere. They would bend steel bars. They would break chains. They would throw an anvil. Is that what it's called? An anvil around like it was a frisbee. Everything changed when a guy named Louis Attila stepped into the spotlight. He was born in a small town in Germany in July of 1844. And when he was growing up, I guess he went to like one of those strongman shows. He was like, this is so cool. I want to look like that guy. At 19, he left home to become an apprentice to an Italian strongman and learn everything he could and develop his own axe. He was like 5'4". But what set Attila apart was that he started treating lifting and getting bigger like a science. He ended up developing new training methods, including resistance exercises, pulley machines, and adjustable dumbbells. And he became like a personal trainer. Attila became known as Professor Attila and started training some pretty high-profile people. For example, the Tsar of Russia, the King of Greece, what? Okay, yeah. And the King of England. So all this fame led to Attila opening up his own gym in New York in 1894. And this was not a thing. Attila's gym was basically one of the first in America. Weights pretty much had to be made by a blacksmith. Before that, you just kind of lifted, you know, the heaviest thing that was around you. Professor Attila, he knew that he would never reach the level of fame he wanted. He didn't have a quote unquote perfect male physique because of his height, and because at this point in the late 1880s, he was considered older. He was in his 40s. So this is when Attila decides to train someone to be his perfect little protege. In the late 1880s, he meets a young German guy named Eugen Sandow. So Eugen was in his early 20s, and he was also starting his career by training to be a strongman. He had the look. Broad shoulders, tiny waist, perfect symmetry. So Attila decides to take Eugen under his wing, refine his technique, and turn him into a star. So Attila does just that. Eugen was thrilled, but he wasn't content with just being strong. He wanted to look good while doing it. So he oiled up his body before flexing for the audience. He started to promote the idea that strength was just as much about looks as it was about power. Eugen Sandow was ahead of his time because he was doing something that no one else was even thinking about. He was branding himself. He sold the idea of the perfect physique based on measurements taken from classical Greek and Roman statues. Vanity had entered the picture. Eugen's whole motto was essentially, why lift in the shadows when you can flex in the spotlight? As he's getting more attention, he starts to distance himself from Attila. In fact, he pretty much erases any trace of Attila from his resume. He wanted people to think like he was self-made. Now, naturally, this Attila off. But then Eugen takes it a step further. In 1894, he wrote a book called Sandow on Physical Training. Most of these methods were directly inspired by, you can say, copied from what like Attila had taught him. By 1901, Eugen had truly cemented himself as like the go-to guy in the fitness world. And this is when he decides to hold the world's first bodybuilding competition at the Royal Albert Hall in London. Over 15,000 people showed up to watch. You know, the bodybuilders, they did some weightlifting, they competed in wrestling, fencing, and did even gymnastics. What set Eugen's competition apart from the old school strongmen was that the winners weren't just going to be judged on like how much they could lift, they would be judged on their physique, how they looked, symmetry, muscle definition. Is he giving Greek god vibe? Now at this point, it was still seen as like low class. But this new twist of bodybuilding becoming, you know, all about the aesthetic, really rebranded muscles to be seen as beautiful, an art. A guy named William Murray ended up winning the competition, and guess what the prize was? A gold statue of Eugen Sandow. On top of being like very full of himself and passing off his mentor's ideas as his own, Eugen Sandow was also a white supremacist. Which makes me even happier to tell you that Eugen was finally publicly defeated and dethroned as the god of bodybuilding by a woman. In 1884, a woman named Katie Brombach was born into a family of German circus performers. Both of her parents were professional strongmen. So she grew up wrestling with her family, and she was so good that her dad offered a prize of 100 gold marks to any man who could outlift her or beat her in the ring. No one could outlift her. No one could beat her in the ring. When Katie was 16, there was an acrobat named Max Heyman who took up this challenge to try and beat Katie. And Katie crushed him pretty quickly. I guess she picked him up and she threw him across the ring. But allegedly, while Max was like on the ground looking up at her, he was like, oh, he fell in love. Max ended up marrying Katie. Katie started incorporating Max into her routine right away. She would hoist him over her head in one hand. She would do this whole bit where she pretended to be a soldier, and like Max, she would pick him up and like pretend he was the gun. He loved it. He's like, toss me, baby. And Katie wasn't just strong for a woman. She was strong, period. And she wanted to prove it. It's the year 1902. There was a weightlifting competition in New York City. And Katie decides, I'm gonna go. So everyone starts out like lifting 50 pounds. Then they go to like 100 pounds. Then they go to 150 pounds. I'm already tired. And then like people, start to drop out one by one. And then they get to 200 pounds. And Katie is still in. And guess who else was still in the competition? Eugen Sandow. So now it's just them, the two of them. So they get up there to 300 pounds. Now, Katie, she goes first because ladies first. So she takes the barbell and she hoists it up and boom, she clears it over her head. So then it's Eugen's turn. He tries to lift it and he only gets to his chest. And that's it. He's done. Which means that Katie won. Now, from that point on, she ended up changing her stage name to Katie Sanwina. Eugen's last name was Sandow, so she made it cute and kind of more feminine sounding, so it's kind of like a diss. After this, her career took off. She ended up performing with the Ringling Brothers and had this incredible act. She juggled cannonballs, she bent iron bars, and of course, her husband was there, and she lifted her husband up over her head because it was a fan favorite. Most of society was not ready to see a woman deadlift her husband. I mean, there's a reason she was seen as a circus act. By the turn of the century, men are still very much leading the way in the bodybuilding world. Over in England, they were having a whole weird movement, muscular Christianity. It all started with a guy named Charles Kingsley. So he was a writer, and he was also a man of the church. Oh. Charles looked around one day and realized that all these British heroes that he really looked up to were muscular. So he became a huge proponent of muscular Christianity. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and it had a lot of men moving from farms to office jobs. And it turned out sitting at a desk all day just wasn't great for, the body or their biceps. On top of that, women all of a sudden had freaking rights. So in Europe and America, everyone was losing their mind at the idea that men were turning into weaklings. The solution? Sports and exercise. Churches and religious schools started promoting athletics as a way to build character. The Young Men's Christian Association, the YMCA. Well, the YMCA was actually founded in 1844 to help young men stay physically, mentally, and spiritually strong. They built gyms specifically to keep men out of trouble and in top shape, all while keeping the faith. Another thing muscular Christianity was secretly behind, they created American football. Because of the fear that men were becoming weak, they needed a sport that knocked them around a little bit, roughed up these boys. And by the 1870s and 80s, the combination of rugby and soccer morphed into something with more tackling, more aggression, and a whole lot more broken bones. The thinking was getting bruises would prove that just because they didn't work a job with physical labor, it didn't mean that they weren't strong. President Teddy Roosevelt was a big supporter of muscular Christianity, and he freaking loved football. Have you ever noticed, in certain churches or certain images of Jesus, all of a sudden, he's super ripped? In a lot of American churches, buff Jesus is lean, he's chiseled, he's oily sometimes, and you're like, okay, buff Jesus. It started with muscular Christianity. Because if being physically strong was a sign of godliness, then obviously Jesus had to have the best physique of all. And this is where bodybuilding really took off as we know it now. In 1939, there was the first ever Mr. America competition. And before you know it, this was followed by competitions like Mr. USA, Mr. World, Mr. Galaxy, Mr. Universe. What else can we claim? Mr. Olympia. And the people who won these competitions could go on to have successful careers based just off that win. And one of these guys was a man named Charles Atlas. And Charles used his fame to create a bodybuilding empire. He created a workout program that became known as the Atlas program. The advertising for his program became pretty iconic. So it was like a comic strip, right? And it would show a skinny guy getting sand kicked in his face at the beach. And because he's getting bullied at the beach, it motivates him to build muscle using the Atlas system. The skinny guy comes back later and he's totally jacked up and he stands up to the bully. Because of these ads, the everyday person was now kind of drawn to these weightlifting gyms, and they were joining bodybuilding competitions. Finally, by the 60s and 70s, weightlifting became mainstream. But of course, this was all centered around men. Before the 50s, women were not allowed to compete in weightlifting competitions, period. So women were fine, we're just going to do our own. So women's bodybuilding competitions started to pop up. And of course, they faced way more criticism than the male ones. People were asking how muscular is too muscular for a woman? This turned a lot of women off, I don't want to be too big or bulky from lifting weights. And if women did exercise, to this day, they mostly stuck to cardio workouts, Thigh Master, jazzercise, you know, like what's aerobics? I don't know. Stuff like that. Cute stuff where you get to wear a little cute little outfit. Not like lifting weights. But the truth was, it was just all propaganda. Because if women could be strong, potentially stronger than a man, it would be just hurt the ego. I mean, the panic of men not being men anymore is what started the whole muscular Christianity movement in the first place. But thankfully, not all women were scared off by this bull. There was a woman named Lisa Lyon. Lisa Lyon was the first women's world bodybuilding champion in 1979. And she was a muse for famous photographers like Robert Mapplethorpe. Her body inspired comic book characters and honestly just redefined female hotness. You could be strong and hot. But of course, you know, there's still a huge gap between what society views as acceptable workouts for men versus women. Back in the early 2000s, strength training for women, not really a thing. But fast forward to today, there was a 2023 survey that found that nearly 50% of women who exercise now incorporate some form of strength training into their routine. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok have been flooded with strong female influencers who inspired women to start lifting. And then on top of that, the rise of CrossFit in the early 2000s played a huge role in normalizing women lifting heavy. Medical research today has consistently shown that strength training does so much good for you. It improves bone density, it boosts your metabolism, and it reduces the risk of injury. It's just interesting and crazy that working out and being strong went from like a circus act to a mainstream part of our culture in less than 200 years. And the journey has given us a lot along the way. I mean, football, the YMCA, Arnold, Planet Fitness, that ugly purple they use. Good for them. I hope you have a good day. You make good choices, and I'll be talking to you guys later. Goodbye.